This is not a paper prepared by myself alone, but in association with Dr. Abby Thomas, Research Assistant in the Kerala Council of Historical Research. And to save time, permit me to read out those portions which would be, I presume, would be relevant to the discussions that's going to be held in this August assembly. And when the chairman comes, I'll concede. Let me start. Now, how people respond to different natural disasters is, of course, a major issue all over the world. And floods are terrible realities for communities all over the world. In the wake of recurring extreme weather events in Kerala, we are realizing, perhaps a little late, that climate change poses greater threat to our common livelihood and collective future. Kerala was hit recently by the most severe rain and inundations in a century, which killed more than 300 people and displaced over 800,000. Vijayananda, I've taken the liberty to start. The monsoons have been a regular part of Kerala's life and culture. Though Kerala is not the wettest part of the subcontinent, its average annual rainfall is highest among the big states in India. Many regions in Kerala are frequently inundated during the annual monsoon. But this year's flood was entirely different. Many people believe that the August 2018 flood was the severest natural disaster that this region has faced in living memory, surpassing perhaps the Oki cyclone. Incidentally, a point which I thought I should be bringing to, in Trivandrum, because Kerala Council of Historical Research did a quick survey about natural disasters which has been faced by people of this region. And in Trivandrum, in the city of Thiruvananthapuram, there were 25 people who have never heard about Oki. They were asking us what was Oki, and we had to explain to them that, I'm trying to say that, this also is happening amongst us. Now, tsunami of 2004 and even the so-called Great Flood of 99 in Malayalam era. Exact comparisons may have to wait. According to Indian Meteorological Department, Kerala received excess rainfall of 37.5% more than the usual. The worst hit districts such as Idukki received 87.5% excess rain than the normal. Notably, the excess rain occurred during an extremely short period of time. The unexpectedness of the recent floods were backed by the fact that between 9th August and 15th August, there were almost unbroken rainfall which measured 352.2 millimeter, more than 3 times than the 98.5 millimeters which were predicted. Such a heavy rain by itself was enough to cause great havoc to life of people or livelihood of people who live in close proximity in interspaced settlements, even in rural areas. The torrential rain triggered massive flooding and landslides. Many people rendered homeless as their dwellings got washed away. The Kerala state, of course, has got nearly 80 dams, and including major dams of about around 40, which had to be opened to ease the pressure of water. There are factors that make Kerala particularly vulnerable to floods. The high population density is a major factor. While the national average is 382, in Kerala it is around 860 per square kilometer. The geography of Kerala played a crucial role in the floods as well. Around 10% of the land area in Kerala lies below the sea level. The coastal plains and lagoons together account more than 16% of the total land area. The low-lying regions like Kuttanad weather floods quite frequently. Now, disasters occur unexpectedly. They encounter their victims when they are without proper defenses. The victims have to do with whatever inadequate objects that is available around them to build bulwarks against the onrushing floodwaters in this particular case. In desperation, they have to turn themselves to themselves and those who are nearby. There are moments of recognition in which people become aware of their inevitable proximity to their fellow human beings. The collective human effort to stop impending onslaught of the disaster will mark the emotionally highest and also the lowest points in this whole experience. The emotionally highest points are derived from the willingness of people to help each other to the point of sacrificing factors most dear to them, including life. It is in this context that the availability of helping hands and the arrival of rescuers from other sections of the larger community who are not affected by the disaster as much as the direct victims become a matter of special attention. A new community is formed, at least for a short period of time. A community where divisions of caste, creed, language, social status, or locality do not matter. The most telling example from the Kerala experience would be something which has been very widely reported and read by many people, and I'm sure that many of you would be remembering, where a girl who was brought up in Abu Dhabi was telling after she was rescued from the floodwaters by fisher folk that when she was told by her tuition teacher that if she doesn't study well, she would be married off to a fisher person. So she says that her first encounter with a fisher person was as her rescuer from inevitable disaster. So, I mean, these kind of experiences have been told and retold several times. Now, why do we look back upon this disastrous experience? Now, how people respond and recalibrate in the midst of an ecological disaster is always available for analytical exercises, analytical studies, but normally it could be easily forgotten too. More important episode for future studies will be the role of disasters in bringing various cultures and communities together. But I don't think that kind of studies have dominated if you look at the worldwide literature. The fisherfolk collective, who are traditionally ignored from historical writings, have demonstrated extraordinary heroic deeds, risking their own lives to help others. They have emerged as indisputable heroes in their rescue missions, defying the stereotypes. The new generation youth, another group which also has to be remembered, rose to the occasion and volunteered in the relief efforts. If the fisherfolk found water is a world which they know better, the young people found electronics and communication is also an area that is their area. So they rose up to the occasion and going against some of the well-set disdain that people of the older generation, including people like me, had of this younger people. I mean, they really proved us all wrong. I mean, that has to be also recorded and recorded systematically so that it can be utilized for the betterment of the society in which we live. It is also important to note that social media platforms and contents were used extensively to help the relief and rescue mission of various groups and also governmental agencies during the flood. This can be correlated with the fact that Kerala is the state in India with the highest human and social development indicators. This has also been proved right in the efforts to prevent the onspread of Nipah virus. I mean, there also education was a major factor, and educational investment, which went much earlier, was a major factor. Kerala's experience of surviving a serious flood therefore needs to be properly archived and understood. In this project, collective and individual experiences will emerge as crucial witnesses of history. Drawing insights from the previous studies, we can document memories of floods in Kerala through artworks, paintings, literature, social media, and news reports, and so on. The project, this kind of a project, should be keen to interweave some of the missing threads and knots in historical knowledge. There are testimonials of hope, benevolence, and survival. They are to be faithfully heard and preserved for the future generations to come. In the absence of initiatives to document people's story of suffering and survival during the flood, the lessons that we have learned from this disaster with great pain and at a high price are likely to be forgotten as new issues arise. Now, with the floodwaters have already receded, and with that, some of our memories have also lost its strength. And this is the situation in which we should reflect upon what exactly were the lessons that we should have learned. One is that it told us how a group of people perceive the flood itself. That is very, very important for further studies on livelihood patterns and also including people who have been non-included in the mainstream of society. People perceived the onslaught of the floods in different ways in different places. For instance, people who lived in inferior housing regions. This is a word which we deliberately use as inferior housing regions because economists and physical planners do work it out in the basis of housing patterns, places for building houses. But some of the houses, which may lie close to each other, maybe one of these houses would be placed in a better region in terms of sustenance, in terms of maintenance, in terms of accessibility to services, particularly social services, and another house next door would be shut out from this. An example would be an island which we studied in Alleppey district, where there was no superior castes in that community. The island is fully occupied or lived in by so-called backward castes and so-called lower castes, as they're called, as they're termed. Now, this group itself is divided by their housing pattern because the lowest of the low tend to live on the bunds on the border of the island. The others live inside, and the others live in not a very remarkably better place, but at least 2 feet higher than where the others are living. And in the onset of the floods, the difference mattered very much. Only the people who were on the bunds on the border got badly hurt, while the people inside were safer. This shows the, of course, where they live is in Kerala, is partly decided by market and partly decided by state activities, because most of this housing for the poor was state-sponsored programs, and state-sponsored program made them live on the border areas. This kind of lower, better and poorer housing zones can be came out very clearly in terms of the flood experience. Second is that by being rescued by others, it was also found that the earlier building patterns, not only of house building but general construction and also construction of roads, had badly tampered with the mobility. In fact, transportation is supposed to make people move swiftly, but in the matter of floods, what we realized was that the way the roads, bridges, and also buildings were built became a kind of an obstacle to speedy movement of rescuers and rescuing vessels. In fact, in the matter of rescuing vessels, the most useful that the rescuers found in the short survey that we did was, incidentally, very interestingly, the racing cars from Trivandrum. There was a group of racing car drivers who used their well-equipped racing cars to go to remote places near Chenganur and Aramula to rescue people. They accounted for 112 people whom they have rescued. And these jeeps, they were literally jeeps, were able to go to regions where even the fishermen's or fisherfolk's wallams could not go. And they were tampered by the kind of constructions that they had to encounter. So I'm not saying that we should keep, we should resort to having racing cars available, but I'm saying that there are these kind of experiences should also be looked at. The third is that the way through which a livelihood situation can be recreated, which would pick out the bad things and drop them and build up on the strength of the earlier. See, historically speaking, the only hypothesis about the formation of the livelihood patterns in Kerala is a term which has been used by observing certain features in medieval Kerala history by Professor M.G.S. Narayanan. He called it the cultural symbiosis of Kerala, and Professor Rajan Gurukal has done much deeper analysis of that, and he located a kind of a economic interdependence between different communities, and this has created a desire among the people to not to have hostility between each other, in spite of differences in culture, differences in religion, differerences in creed, etc., etc. But my point is that this is something which has been reascertained in the 1980s by Ashutosh Varshney, who did a survey of the tradesmen in Calicut, the town of Calicut, where again he found that this interdependence of the people who produces things and people who sell things, irrespective of the religion, seems to be a major binding factor. But this doesn't include those people who do not get into the transactions. That is one thing. Secondly, if they are made to be included in the transactions, that is done within the framework of welfare. Kerala's main achievements are in terms of welfare activities, and this has of course been well recorded. And then there is a whole hypothesis about the commercialization of agriculture, which created demands for certain products in Kerala, and it led to an intensive commercialization as well as extensive commercialization. So this intensive commercialization comes down in the social structure. If you draw a diagram, the social structure comes down to the middle level and to the lower middle level, not to the lowest level. And the lowest level in the social structure will be included only if there is a deliberate welfare scheme meant for them. That seems to be the stage in which Kerala society is. And during the floods, as well as in other instances, Kerala reach up to the lower people at the lowest level of the social structure only by deliberate welfare measures. The point left, inevitably, the point left to us is that can't we have a structural reform in terms of primarily land holding, house ownership in the sense that already it has been mentioned in the last session, the number of houses that is being unused while people are without any housing. So there could be a structural reform in the pattern of livelihood, a pattern of living, which could bring about the more equal distribution of the assets, so that whenever we have to face a major disaster, we would be better equipped to face it. Secondly, this should be done in such a manner that the restructuring itself should be of a nature which would prevent further disasters too. That, of course, is must be having a whole lecture for itself, which I am not going to. Thank you very much.